This is going to show the ice shooting at a couple different angles in super slow-mo so we can see what happened. Okay, you've been warned.
Many of the narratives are false and ridiculous. I'm not inclined to believe anything unless I can see it myself. Because if you're not skeptical, even if only 1 in 5 false narratives stick, you'll still wind up believing boatloads the way things are these days. So I'm going to do a lot of freeze frame and slow motion, just to see what we can know.
Also, really trying to understand what's real helps me deal with the stress of all the stuff that's happening. Or maybe it doesn't. I still try though. We have a lot of angles, but unfortunately they seem to be either terrible or obstructed. However, with freeze frames and slow-mo, we can see most of how it unfolded and how fast the vehicle was moving, and that is why I'm making this video. Now, if you clicked on this, you've probably seen both of these angles. One is a side view where the guy is in the way, but we can see how wide he is at the side while still firing. In fact, I was just inclined to believe the agent even made contact with the vehicle when I saw this. But then there's this other angle where it kind of looks like he does. But when they're synced, at a point where it looks like he's still being pushed by the vehicle here on bottom, we can see that he was already clear. So is this an illusion of badly compressed fuzzy video? At first I thought maybe, but if we look hard we can still see quite a lot and even calculate how fast he was going just before he fires the first bullet. After that it's not so important because only a couple of frames after this muzzle flash, he's provably clear off to the side as we can see a clear gap between the vehicle and both agents.
But yeah, at first I thought it was a trick of the bad video, pixels, fuzz, all over the place. As I thought that, well, on top he still appears to be pushed. From the bottom he appears to be jumping to the side at the same times. I also noticed that in every frame the entire front was visible, headlight to headlight. And I figured that if he did get hit, although it's hard to see, at least we see his body in front of part of it at one point. But we don't. The entire front is always completely unobstructed in every frame. So at first I thought he didn't even get hit.
But now I do think he makes contact with the vehicle. So what happened? I will do a brief recap of the situation, and I will be critical of ICE. But then again, let the video be the final judge for the viewer.
Get out of the car.
The agent had been filming her on his phone. He had his arm fully outstretched, as we can see here if we squint really hard. She was doing a thing where she was honking on her horn to alert the neighborhood of possible raids. From interviews, we know that some of the residents thought they were there to hit an elementary school, although that's unproven. But later that day, a high school will be hit, however. However, given the circumstances, I don't think the neighborhood minded her honking. The agents knew she was non-threatening. They had encountered her before. Arguments could be made about her parking, but cars could get around. I believe the fact that he was standing in front of her car filming with his phone supports that they knew that she wasn't an immediate danger. This is kind of a sad part because she was pulling out, and if that car hadn't driven right by right then, she'd probably still be alive. But she stops and waits. The agents forcefully confront her and she panics, and I believe that he panics too. We see her back up and try to steer away. But the car stops, the agent pulls a gun, probably hearing the engine rev. He had a history with cars that was probably a factor being involved in a serious incident some months prior.
It's very illustrative that the person targeting this one was a sex offender. Well alleged, but, a bad guy. And according to reports, Ross the ICE agent was raked quite a ways and needed upwards of 50 stitches. Although they do get bad guys, and about 3/4 of the time it's not the case. On the narratives being employed on these people alone, I can address 6 or 7 false ones off the top of my head. The majority of households are employed, pay taxes even. Recently, most are undocumented because of expired visas. They do not vote except for a fraction of not even 1%, etc. I'll spare you the rant, but I encourage you to fact check everything. Don't even get me started about the monstrously exaggerated reasons they're using for an excuse for all this ICE stuff anyway. There were fraud cases, but these numbers are basically fiction. Or this politically connected and hyped viral video whose fabrications are evident the moment you start looking at inspection records. This video and ensuing political media and influencer firestorm, all built atop the largely fabricated claims, became the political excuse for all this ICE nonsense to commence in the first place. I think the real point is an attempted provocation to justify further action to take forceful control of various mechanisms of our democracy. The controversial behavior is a feature, not a bug. Thank goodness it's not playing very well for the majority of the public eye right now. Really can't believe a thing. But yeah, there are bad guys too, and they do get some. It's just not the majority of cases. Maybe it wasn't allegedly. Alright, I take that back. See, even I'm wrong sometimes. Sorry for railing against narratives and blurting out a bunch of my own, but to me it sure adds up. Anyway, never believe narrative, even mine, and let's get back to seeing if this guy gets hit and how.
He brings his cell phone camera down, and it took me forever to put this together, but when he puts his arm down in a top angle, we can see his phone hand right over the far left headlight. The gun hand is completely outstretched, and this is where he fires. I still can't tell, but he either jumps or pushes himself off before he fires a couple more.
Now, it could be a trick of my eyes, but it looks like he's sort of leaning forwards before.
So, at the end of the day, he's never hit from the front, but he leans over the side before firing. And that's what he does. Here's the same 4 moments of interest from the synced up view.
A bit faster. At full speed from draw to 4 shots is about 3 seconds, and you can see his elbow move just before the car goes forward as he draws, but he probably hears it rev.
No! No!
Bitch.
For whatever reason, they don't let paramedics get through for a while. She was still alive when they did get there. She likely mostly bled out over those 15 minutes where they couldn't get through.
Shame!
I didn't really consider the possibility that she was still alive for quite some time, despite receiving 4 bullet wounds. Suddenly, I understand this physician's concern a lot more urgently.
Can I go check a pulse?
No! Back up! Now!
I'm a physician!
I don't care!
I understand keeping bystanders out, but the possibility she was still alive and how critical it was likely in the forefront of this guy's brain. It doesn't seem to be for at least some of the agents, considering how long it took. And again, to this administration, that may be a feature, not a bug. I have so many problems with so much of this. I believe they acted callous, the guy does not look hurt, and he just leaves. But still, I think contact was made. It looks like he leaned in over the hood, which is weird if he was actually panicking. I would have assumed that stepping to the side would be easier. But I still do think he was panicking. Alright, now let's figure out how fast she was going. Here's where the side view comes in handy, because we can see not very fast. From the top video too, look how long it takes the hood to pass him. Yes, I think he had time to react. The first shot is fired quite soon after the car starts moving forward. It speeds up rapidly, but at that exact point it wasn't moving fast. There are valid criticisms about standing in front of a car during a confrontation, and I think they could have avoided escalation knowing it was a woman who was annoying to them, but wasn't previously any threat. She didn't have a gun and a badge, but they did. And it's possible, given all the clips I've seen, that some of these agents come into situations already, wanting some, as they say, which I think is thin-skinned, which is okay if you're a normal person, but I think it's beneath the standards we ought to require for authority. But then the fundamental problem would really lie on the leadership, who ought to be supporting these standards but aren't. And I really think it does. I still think he panics. Nothing will be ever looked at, so it's just hypothetical. In fact, they started an investigation into the deceased woman's partner for what? I don't know. Giving him sass, I guess. This caused a handful of prosecutors to resign, and it's not the first time. But at this point in the bottom view, we can see the steps the other agent is taking as he's holding onto the door, and they're pretty small. Here they're already clear, and we can see he's taking 2 small steps. At first I thought about, what if I looked at the tire, how long it takes the front and the back of the tire to pass this white line. But I couldn't really estimate it. What we do have is the agent's hand on the front door handle here, and then he takes a step, and right here his arm is by the back handle as it's still stretched and still kind of in the same position relative to his foot. This is about the same time frame that we're interested in, so let's use these as a points of reference. From this frame, grabbing the front handle to this frame, grabbing where his hand is by the back, it's exactly 1 second in the timestamps. And with a reasonable margin for error, we can see the car has moved approximately 1 door length, plus about a foot to account for the step that the agent takes. Google said these doors are 36 to 38 inches wide, so let's go with 38, the larger value, and add about a foot on top of that, which totals reasonably about 50 inches in 1 second. I'm going to be off a little, maybe 10-15%, maybe it's longer, maybe he moves less than a foot, but that's my best good faith estimate, about 50 inches in about 1 second at this crucial time. This is not very fast. Do the math and get 2.84 miles per hour. My old chemistry professor would probably have me call it 3 miles per hour because of significant digits, but that's still just a brisk walking speed, and I hope the tiny steps can further show the evidence for that's about how fast she was going. Of course, this is average speed. It's slower to start, faster at the end, and with the high revs, the speed is probably increasing like a curve. But his phone comes down about halfway through. We see it on the hood for a few frames. That's toward the end. So if we're generous, maybe somewhere between 3 and 4 miles per hour. That's still pretty slow though.
So they're saying he had internal bleeding. If you collide with a wall of moving car at 3 to 4 miles per hour, would that do it? Well, he's got a bit of a gut, and as someone with the same, I can tell you we fall a bit heavier. So if I'm right, he's leaning forward, and if he hits his chest on the hood for a fraction of a second, it could easily double the effective velocity to about 6 to 8 miles per hour, and that could bruise a rib or such. So it is possible. I don't believe anything until I see it, but this one could be true. But I can understand the skepticism because I'm a bit of a skeptic myself, and we've all seen a lot of ridiculous stuff, and I had to watch it a few times myself before I could understand how it could happen.
Of course, if I'm right, it's really only explained if he leans into the vehicle at about the same speed he happened to be going at that instant, which is pretty slow. I still can't tell, but that does bring up the hypothetical. Did she hit him, or did he lean forward into the car to fire? It was all over in an instant anyway, and I think with better standards in multiple areas, this could have been easily avoided. But then again, I don't think current leadership wants standards.
Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a nice day.